Hey everyone, welcome to ChangeNerd Show, episode 2, where we're talking about getting to grit through deliberate practice and flow. We're here with you, for most of you here in the Central Time Zone, at 6:30 a.m. on Tuesday morning. Every Tuesday morning at 6:30, we hope that you join us for a little bit of espresso to your ears. What we're going to talk about today is, what is grit? Why does it matter to people who are leading projects, change at the executive level? Then we'll talk about and we'll identify necessary ingredients for deliberate practice and flow. How do you actually do deliberate practice and how do you experience more flow? And then third, we'll identify some key techniques, tools, and the hottest info to help you get to grit. Sound good?
Absolutely. Let's get into it.
All right, let's get into it. So when we think about it, before we get into today, Brian, tell us a little bit about the ChangeNerd community.
All right. So the ChangeNerd community is an online learning community for enterprise change makers. So if you work in HR, IT, business transformation, PMO, change management, jump into the ChangeNerd community. We have weekly conversations, and we have a lot for you. So if you're an enterprise change maker and you want to connect with like-minded people, jump into the ChangeNerd community. All right, Stephanie, let's get into the content.
All right. So we know what is grit, right? We know that grit is really perseverance and passion for your long-term goals. And we know that Angela Duckworth out of UPenn has done a lot of work around this. And both Brian and I are huge fans. So when we think about getting to grit, when we think about creating more gritty experiences and being grittier people, we know that deliberate practice is one of the things that we need to do more of, right? It's a behavior.
It is behavior.
Right? When we think about it within our organization, Brian, how do we do more deliberate practice? Because we know so often it's boring and it's rote. And, you think about basketball players shooting free throws all the time, but really we know that grittier people do more of it. So tell me a little bit about, how do you incorporate deliberate practice, or what are some techniques to incorporate deliberate practice into your day-to-day?
Yeah. So I guess I'll hit it from two sides. Both as an individual, I think it's really based on goals, right? So personally, it's really based on a goal that I'm trying to achieve, and then identifying those habits that I can kind of implement on a daily basis that will kind of indicate progress. Within an organization, or even working within the context of a team, you have to kind of adjust the way you think about it, because it's all about what the team needs to achieve. And then, if you think about the work that you're doing and the people that you're doing the work with, you guys are already working, you're already achieving something. It's just really taking the time to have the conversation to say, hey guys, let's pause for a second and do some self-reflection. When we're seeing the highest results, when we're really accelerating the work, what conditions are in place, right? What's happening around us? What people are in the room, what insights do we have? Let's spell that out. And it may even help to facilitate an exercise. You have people put posters on the wall or whatever to really capture what's happening when the team is operating at their best, and then co-creating a daily habit or a weekly habit based on, the team's cadence, to say, okay, what can we do on a more routine basis to help us get closer to this state of flow and become more of a grittier team. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's excellent. And I think what I'm hearing you say too, and what we talk a lot about is, when we're doing something that is a critical success factor for us, really defining what those are, and then continuing to sort of put those into place and deliberately practicing those. So actually practicing the critical success factors on the daily. I love that.
And it's hard. It's so hard, because especially, well, first, it's changing behavior, right? And so, and it's interesting, because those of us who work to help other employees, adjust to new ways of working, oftentimes we don't like change, even though it's our job to help other people facilitate change. But it's behavior, so it's very, very difficult. But again, I think that's why the outcome has to be spelled out, especially if you're working with, a team in a team atmosphere. What are we really trying to achieve? And what's the higher purpose, right? So even if your team is working on, let's say, a technology implementation, right, which can actually get kind of bored on a day-to-day or weekly basis, what's that higher purpose? This technology is enabling something to happen, right? So how do you connect the team to a higher purpose, and then getting to the point where, what are those daily or weekly routines that we can implement.
Great. Yeah. All right, Brian. So that's great. What sort of thoughts or tips, tricks, before we get into talking about flow, what sort of tips, tricks, things that you have up your sleeve that can really help people get to be more gritty? Talk
Yeah.
to us a little bit about that.
Yep. And then, just to kind of reiterate, like when we're talking about grit, we're talking about perseverance to a long-term achievement, right? And so like that's just to set it in context. There's a few tips. Number one, it's all around pursuing your interest, right? You have to, it can't be boring. It has to be something that you're intrigued about. And then practicing daily. It's a behavioral change and it just requires it. And then connecting to a higher purpose. And then the last two, cultivating hope and then surrounding yourself with gritty people. So those are the 5 tips that I would offer. Not everyone would be immediately applicable in the workplace. So you kind of have to think through which ones you can actually, leverage. But, as me and Stephanie talked about earlier, it's so important to just pause for a second with your team and ask the question, when we're at our best, what's happening? And then kind of trying your best to kind of create those conditions more often so that you can see higher levels of success.
Yeah, and I think what you're talking about is sort of the last key piece, which is really talking about this flow. It's really an experience that you have, right? Where, time doesn't seem to matter. It's those instances when you're at work and you're working on something or maybe you're somewhere else and all of a sudden you look up and it's 2 hours later and you're like, wait, what just happened here? That's a piece or that's an indicator of you being in flow. Right. Or when you feel like you have a deep passion around something and, you're just loving what you do, that's really about flow. And so the tips that you gave earlier and what we have already talked about, which is, a nice sort of team exercise is about asking your team, when are you at your best? Like you just said, and that could be even recreating the environmental factors about creating the opportunity for flow to occur.
Rest in peace to Kobe Bryant. Before he passed away, like he would oftentimes talk about like his work ethic and how he would go to the gym at like 4:00 in the morning and things of that nature, but it became a habit, right? But if you do that every day for years, when you're at the gym, you're in your flow state, right? It's like muscle memory, So like, it's just a great example of, and then you look at the result, you're like, oh man, Kobe Bryant was such a gritty person, right? But he didn't start off that way. Like nobody starts off that way. So it's just kind of connecting the dots, I think, between grit and flow. But I do think, like, in researching and reading before we even jumped in this episode, I think that grit is a very complex concept to bring to life because it's so many factors that leads up to this grit result, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. It is. It's so complex. And I think a lot of times, and you said this beautifully earlier, is, grit is a great word. It's 4 letters, right? It's a 4-letter word. But it's such a complex term and concept to understand. If you want to learn more about it, obviously all of y'all know about probably this book, Grit by Angela Duckworth. One of my favorite books and really excellent, especially for people who are leading change, thinking about change. You're a change maker in your organization or as an independent consultant or as an exec, thinking about doing these types of behaviors, just not only in your professional life, but also in your personal life, helps you become more gritty. And that's really kind of the end goal of what we're trying to get to today is how do we actually define some recipes, some critical success factors to help us get to grit. So that sums up our ChangeNerd Show, episode 2, Getting to Grit through deliberate practice and flow today. We hope that you got a little bit of an energy charge this morning, spending time with Brian and me. We're so lucky to have you all in the community. If you're not in it yet, make sure you head there, community.changenerd.com. Of it. Make sure that you grab it. This is one of my references. Highly recommend. Aiden!
Stephanie. I knew.
That was like, I'm just going to say it now.
Okay. It's totally fine. Okay. Whatever you say. All right. You ready?